It's Thursday, July 11th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is, I think, a first-time guest of the show, Derek Brown, D-Bro himself of Fantasy Pros. D-Bro, what's going on, buddy?
What's up, Harmon? Yeah, first time. This kind of has like that whole new car smell, man. I'm loving this. Like, can we just drive this every day to work? Like, it's a beautiful time, buddy. I mean, we got summer. We got the ability to sit by the pool. I mean, I don't know what you're doing for R&R before crunch time gets here, man. But thanks for having me.
Of course, buddy. Happy to do it. Unfortunately, I'm looking out of my window right now at a torrential downpour. But listen, D-Bro, you know I'm an old man now because I'm looking out this rain and I'm like, we needed this, man. We needed this rain. We needed it. The yard needed it. My bones needed it. The humidity, my God. So yeah, that's where I'm at this point of the calendar.
Was there thunder this morning and you rolled over in bed and you said to the wife, man, the grass really needed this outside? That's when you know you've hit over the hill, Harmon. Just to let you know, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Actually, what I thought, because we do have a sprinkler system here at the house, and what I thought was, oh my God, I'm pretty sure the sprinkler system ran this morning and it's going to rain. Like, wow, I just doubled up on the water. That's too much water. So, yeah, again, this is where we're at. Clearly washed, clearly well past our prime. Yeah. But D-Bro, this series here on the podcast is still well in its prime. And for the new people out there who maybe are just coming to the show or you're just checking us out, what we do here in the summer, it's called Flip the Script. This is a series where we go back and look at the biggest surprises and disappointments from the 2023 season, and we try to, a little tongue-in-cheek, try to identify who we think are going to be this year's version. And today, I teased it on the last episode, it's the one I'm looking forward to the most, but also not looking forward to at all, because it is who will be this year's Puka Nacua, a rookie wide receiver that comes out of nowhere to become a high-end fantasy starter. Let me set the table here real quick. I don't do this on every episode, but I think it's necessary here. Here's what we are not doing today. We are not going to find a day 3 rookie receiver who comes out and drops a top 5 fantasy record-breaking NFL year. It's not going to happen this year. It might not ever happen again in the history of the sport. So with that being said, got it? Social media aggregators, troublemakers, general enemies of the show, that is not what we are doing here. We are merely going to talk through some non-round 1 rookie receivers who are in good spots to succeed in their first seasons. I say all this, D-Bro, because 2023 Puka Nacua is a one-of-one season. It's an all-time historic campaign that needs to be appreciated. But on that note, buddy, the reason that I wanted to have you on this show is because there were a lot of people who liked Puka Nacua last year. I liked Puka Nacua. I remember going on JJ Zacharyason's show and his, draft evaluation process. Also really liked Puka. So, but at the same time, I can't remember somebody who was a more vocal appreciator of Puka going into the draft last year than you. So I thought you were a perfect person to sort of help us look back before we look forward. What was it about Puka's prospect evaluation that what can we learn from that? And what was it that really made him stand out as a player to you?
Oh, Harmon, I loved him as a prospect. I mean, I know, like you said, a lot of sharp people in the industry, including yourself, JJ, everybody else in the space, liked him as a player too. But like the things that jumped out for Puka for me, it wasn't just the film, which is fantastic. I mean, you saw as soon as you turned on the film, the body control, the route running, the ability to not only beat zone, and press coverage and man coverage, but it was also the analytics that backed up all of that. So I try to marry and come from both sides of the aisle when I'm looking at prospects and players and projecting them to the NFL. And so I know with RP, you usually, what is it, like a sample of 5 to 7 games, Harmon? I don't want to speak out of turn for you.
Yeah, usually it's 8 games. For Puka, He was one of these ones I had to do a mini sample on because there wasn't, number one, there was a lot of injuries, which of course is a big deal when we're talking about his prospect profile, but just there wasn't that much film that I had on him last year. So I think I only did 3 on him.
Yeah, and so same thing. Like I go back and I try to marry the analytics to also the film. So if I can find the all 22 for guys, I mean, I'm watching minimum 5 games, usually 7 to 8 if I can find the all 22, which is like striking gold. I mean, you know this struggle.
Yeah.
And trying to find that, but he popped both film and analytics. I mean, this is a player that the injuries, and I think the other part about all this is that the outside metrics or the peripherals on it, like not going to an SEC, like a big helmet college, so he's going to get the puff and praise of the SEC and other places like that, but also the injuries, transferring, and I think a lot of that, and the testing, because it's not like he tested just insane, so can build the hype for him during the pre-draft process, but it was the film as well as the analytics, because over his final 2 seasons, we're talking about a wide receiver that was entering the NFL draft over his final 2 years, 2nd and 6th in yards per route run overall. In his final season, he was also top 23 amongst all FBS wide receivers, at least 15 targets versus man and zone coverage in yards per route run against those 2 particular coverages. So it was like, I love the film. I loved the analytical profile for him. And really, there were just so many other things that I don't want to say are noise, but I mean, and I'll throw this back to you, Harmon. Like, if there's any position, looking at the skill guys for running back, tight end, wide receiver, that we're willing, or we should be willing to say, look, you don't have to be an athletic freak to be awesome at this. Do we not see that with the wide receiver, like over years after year after year, where it's like, you just need to hit the benchmarks of testing. You don't have to run a 4.2 or 4.3 to get open at will and to be freaking awesome as a wide receiver. So, I mean, do you agree with that? Like, I think there's more nuance and context that comes with playing the wide receiver position that, all the measurables can't always grasp.
Yeah, I think Zach Whitman years ago used to do, I don't know if he still does this, but I don't think he does, but 3 Sigma athlete basically was like, the using the Spark score that like the Seahawks used to sort of identify, again, the most athletic prospects, the whole thing. I remember Rashard Higgins, years ago was a player that I really liked on film. And but at the same time, he had some of the worst like athletic testing possible at the receiver position. Like, that is a red flag when you're like a non-NFL caliber athlete. And honestly, Higgins ended up making a decent career for himself, like played for a couple of teams, had a couple of moments, which for a non-NFL caliber athlete actually ended up being a pretty nice little moment for him. But again, if you're there, that's concerning. But if you're just in this large swath, like the middle range of players, that's fine. Like you said, hitting certain benchmarks and really like athleticism at the combine can end up being something that leads us astray at the receiver position. So I would totally agree with you that like athleticism is not one of the first boxes you need to check at this position. Especially, I should say, the way we measure it from like a combine sense. The in-game GPS stuff, like a lot of that is what the Rams were drawn to with both Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. So that's a whole different set of discussions.
Yeah, I don't disagree with all of that. And anybody can go watch all the pre-draft clips with the Rams talking about, comparing him to previous players that got drafted, where it's like, don't ask him to go run a 40, but in-game wise, his miles per hour, and he's checking a ton of boxes. So yeah, that's a total different rabbit hole. But like, just the correlation to high-end athleticism, like you don't need that. Just check the boxes. I don't care if you run a 4.4 versus like a 4.5. I care if you run like a 4.8 and stuff like that. So again, going back to it, there's more context with getting open and being a good wide receiver than just what you can do in gym shorts with a stopwatch.
100%. So I went back and was just looking at the write-up that I had on him at Reception Perception last year. You look at just a lot of the like the results, the things that I track. 74% success rate versus man, really, really good. Just under 79% success rate versus zone. That's pretty solid for a 3-game sample. 73% success rate versus press, which was the one number that like made me push him up my ranks. I think I had him like receiver 12 last year. Didn't drop a lot of passes when I watched him. Was pretty decent in the open field, like able to break some tackles out there. So checking a lot of boxes, but again, what I wrote was, in the summary of it, overall, Nacua is a rugged player who is reliable when on the field and projects as a solid route runner, especially in the short game. I can see him sticking on an NFL roster and ultimately cracking into a rotation. He has some upside as a guy that's probably going to go on day 3 to eventually earn targets and become a trusted outlet receiver. So yeah, I liked him, but like, again, this is the tough part about saying like I like Puka Nacua, because I liked him, you liked him, a lot of these people liked him. Nobody saw like a historic NFL campaign coming. So I think that's where we can go next with our kind of conversation here. So a lot of what I think I said there, guy that earns targets, trusted outlet receiver, and a rugged player, like, is true. That is who he is at the NFL level. But from a production standpoint, he ends up having this outrageous rookie year because he lands with the Rams. So Debro, next part of this conversation, like, why did this turn into a historic campaign for him when no one really saw that coming?
I chalk this up to two things. We had a depth chart where he had the ability to climb it quickly in short order. So looking at just how the composition of that depth chart and what we were just even trying to project in our mind's eye walking into last year is, okay, like, we're not projecting a historic rookie season for Puka Nacua, but could he be starting in two wide receiver sets immediately or in short order, considering the other wide receivers around him? And I know, again, that's going to lead us down a few different roads as we kind of talk about players for this upcoming season. And I think looking at that, and especially when we look at this from the context of, you're not around one guy, you're not around two guys as far as NFL draft capital. You need that quick ability as far as to get on the field and to outkick your draft capital. Like, guys that walk into the NFL and they're drafted in the first and second round, they're offered opportunities to fail and to learn on the job a lot of different times. The guys that go on day 3, like the guys that go round 4, round 5, they're not offered those types of opportunities. So either we need depth charts of where these guys can get an easy lane, both from the outset or with maybe one injury, to where if they get opportunities, do they have the talent and can they seize those opportunities? But they have to get them first and foremost, Harmon.
Yeah, ambiguity breeds opportunity. And the fact that the Rams were a team just overall dripping with ambiguity last year is a key part of this. And I think to boil down what we're looking for in a Puka Nacua type of season, again, not a guy that's about to have that year, but that type of season, like a rookie that's going to outkick expectations, is we're looking for a guy who is a misunderstood talent, straight up. Like, I think he was an underrated prospect, period. I mean, again, I can go back and remember like conversations having with Rich Rebar last year where we were like, why is like this guy's not like being talked about? And a lot of it is what you mentioned there, is that injury plagued profile, just didn't pop at a big school, didn't pop at the combine, didn't check those type of boxes. So he ends up being kind of an underrated prospect, but also the situation was underrated. Like, if you go back and read some of the reports from Jordan Rodriguez out of Rams training camp, like, this was a team that everybody had profiled as just like, yeah, Sean McVay is like pretty checked out because he almost retired or whatever. Matthew Stafford coming off this bad year, like, they gutted the roster and it's just all these young dudes out there. But the fact that there was all these young dudes out there, the vibes were great. And like, McVay was really invested in teaching this roster, getting back into the coaching part of it. So not like a misunderstanding of the player, and also a misunderstanding of the situation the player was walking into with that ambiguity is part of what led to this big season by him.
Yeah, I agree. All parts or pieces.
And I think the final thing to point out here is also like that situation with Sean McVay. That's a good offensive ecosystem. I know they were coming off a bad year, obviously, in 2022. A lot of factors led to that. But overall, McVay is a coach that we should have, and we certainly do now, and probably should always for the future, have trust in these situations. Because like, I look at how they used Puka last year. Like, you look at his route percentage chart last year. It looks like a slot receiver, right? It's like digs and slants and curls and these short area stuff. But like, he's running these big crossing routes outside. So like, you really had to watch him to get a full picture of almost like, and then this will transition as well, Debro, just to touch on what do you think of his prospects this season, because I find him to be kind of like a weird player to talk about and rank, because what he does is so different than like a Brandon Ayuk or a Garrett Wilson or any of these like traditional like number one receivers that are on the come up that we think, much less like the elite guys at the top of the position. So that's what also I think contributed to his massive season, was a coach who really understood this pretty singular skill set and how to deploy it. So with that in mind, I think it's because you're the Puka guy. We got to get your take on this whole thing. Like, what do you think of him this year, as he is like a consensus round 1 fantasy pick?
I think there's ceiling and there's still meat on the bone for where he's going even in drafts. I mean, a lot of times he's being ranked as like a mid to low end wide receiver 1, depending on rankings that you're following and stuff. And I think that the ceiling for him to achieve, and I'm not going to say throw this out here and trying to be hyperbolic, but like the high end parts of being a wide receiver 1, like, I'm not going to project like the legendary Cooper Kupp season on Puka, but what was he doing out the gate with no Kupp last year? Like, if Kupp never returned, what type of season will we have gotten from Puka if Kupp didn't come back? So like, we've already gotten a little bit of a preview of what a true ceiling outcome for Puka would look like the first few weeks of last season. So I think like if we get Kupp, and I want him to stay healthy the entire year, but considering advancing age, the injuries have been mounting the last few years. If he takes another small step back, and he's still a really solid wide receiver, both in fantasy and NFL circles, but this passing attack, and Matthew Stafford has proved time and time again, he's the wide receiver kingmaker.
Yeah.
If they lean on Puka and he stays healthy, he could be a top 3 wide receiver this year. Like, he's already shown us that type of upside when we just look back to last year when Kupp wasn't even there.
It's a great point, because I think, and I'm sure people have seen this analysis a lot this offseason of like, well, if you look at the games where Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua were on there together, and I mean, by the way, he still has great target numbers, great targets per route, the whole deal. And I think that safety with Puka is something that's going to really appeal to a lot of people, because look at the composition of the depth chart right now. There's Cooper Kupp, there's Puka Nacua, there's Demarcus Robinson, who did have some nice moments at the end of last year, but Jordan Whittington, they draft very late this year, Tyler Johnson, Tutu Atwell, like, even at the tight end position, there's questions there after they add Colby Parkinson, and like, what's Tyler Higbee doing from a health perspective? And also, like, if you're just a general target share bro, these two receivers are going to have high target share numbers, Kupp and Nacua, this year, because they're going to run the piss out of the ball this year, and they're going to funnel the ball to those top 2 wideouts almost no matter what. So that's the floor of it. But you're right that with any pick that you're making early on, first, second round in your fantasy drafts, best ball, whatever, you should also consider like the contingent upside there. And you're right to point out that the proof is in the pudding what the contingent upside is for Puka Nacua if Cooper Kupp struggles with injuries. And I go back and forth on how to feel about Cooper Kupp. Like, I know a lot of people really like him as a value this year in round 3 in early best ball drafts. Like, we'll see where he goes in like real deal traditional redraft leagues, but I can kind of, again, see myself going back and forth on, like, I'm in the middle of working through his charting data right now, and even that's like going to be not conclusive, because just who knows where he's going to be at this point in his career.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And when I kind of projecting the Rams passing attack out this year and how I'm kind of attacking it in best ball drafts, like, I find myself aggressively drafting Puka. Like, I've got him as my wide receiver 6, I think, and he's at the top of tier 2. I think expecting him, and some of that rank is foretelling. Like, I'm kind of expecting him to break into that tier 1 of wide receivers this year. But I find myself fading Kupp in a lot of different drafts only because I think he's fairly priced, but I don't think the price of him taking a step back is being equated into where he goes in drafts, because we look at the sample size of Nacua and Kupp on the field at the same time last year. He was the wide receiver 23 in fantasy points per game, and that's about where he's being drafted. Like, ECR on Fantasy Pros has been anywhere from like wide receiver 21 to wide receiver 24. And I've got him lower in my ranks. Like, I have him as a wide receiver 3, which some people could hate that, but projecting a small step back for Cooper Kupp is not insane. And I find myself drafting a ton of Demarcus Robinson because, like you pointed out, Harmon, like, whenever he finally got the starting job, I mean, he was the wide receiver 31 in fantasy points per game. He checked a ton of boxes when you look at whether you want to talk about yards per route run, target share, first downs per route run, all those different metrics. When he was the starter, we did see him produce really, really good numbers. So I'm enjoying the value, or taking the upside on Puka, or enjoying the value of Demarcus Robinson in drafts, and that leads me to a little bit less Cooper Kupp.
All right, so I think we've set the table of like what happened with Puka, why that was such a successful season, and how that can help us sort of look for candidates to be this year's Puka Nacua. So let's waste no more time. Let's get into it. We, again, are only going to talk about non-round 1 players this year. Yes, obviously that can be second-round players, third-round players. We're not necessarily looking at just day 3 guys. So if you haven't been paying attention to the NFL for months, good on you. Congratulations on having a life. Debro and I certainly do not have lives. We've been doing draft work all this whole time, leading up into fantasy draft season. So the players who went in round 1 this year: Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy, Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Legette. They do not count this year. Everybody else that was picked Or if you're going to pull an undrafted guy on me, D-Bro, that's fine too. Those players are all on the board here. So I'm going to let you go first. We are doing this Andy Barron's secret list style. D-Bro's got candidates. I've got candidates. We might overlap here before we get to our 3 finalists that we're going to vote on. So you go first. Give me your first candidate to be this year's Puka Nacua.
First guy I got to bring up here, and I got similar vibes. Again, not saying he's going to be Puka Nacua and shatter every rookie record out there, but when I turned on the film, I felt like this was a player that was mischaracterized in both the role that he played in college, specifically his final year, and how we can project him to the NFL, and that's Javon Baker. Like, I loved his film. I looked at how UCF used him as a field stretcher, and I'm sure you found a lot of the same things in your perception charting, Harmon, is that, like, they used him as not a one-trick pony, but a lot stretching the field. When you want to talk about ADOT, you want to talk about where most of his targets come from. But I think we could see Javon Baker, and again, talking about a player that was drafted in the 4th round of the NFL draft, I didn't agree with him falling that far. I had a late round 2, early round 3 grade on him. I would have liked the Patriots draft a lot more if they would have inversed their picks of Ja'Lynn Polk and Javon Baker. But looking at his profile, there are a lot of parallels that we can draw as far as loved his film, loved his ability to both play inside, outside. I think he can be a high volume wide receiver in the NFL, although he was used mostly in a field stretching role. But getting to the analytics and not just the film here, I mean, final season at UCF, 8th in yards per route run, 24th in PFF receiving grade. I talked about the yards per route run versus zone and man boxes that Puka checked in his final year. Baker was 31st in yards per route run versus man coverage, 14th versus zone. Both of those things play up because you're not going to see a ton of man coverage every single week in the NFL. Every single NFL team right now runs zone at least 54.5% of the defensive snaps. Over half the league, that mark is even higher. It's over 70%. So I look at Baker. He checks so many boxes for me, Harmon, both film, both analytics, and we talk about the depth chart. Like, okay, Ja'Lynn Polk got the draft capital. We think he probably is starting in 3 wide receiver sets. What are we going to see out of the Patriots after that, though? Kendrick Bourne, we don't know what we're going to get out of him. Is he going to be a full-time starter this year? Is he going to be healthy? Pop Douglas popped last year. He was a 6th-round rookie. Is he going to be a starter this year? I know the offseason buzz is pretty heavy for him right now. But Baker, if you were going to tell me in my mind's eye, like week 15, week 16, do I see an outcome where Baker is not only starting in 3 wide receiver sets, 2 wide receiver sets, but he's playing the X and he's leading them in targets on a weekly basis? I can easily see that happening.
So I love this candidate for a couple of different reasons. One, you mentioned what a role he was in at UCF last year. And yeah, I charted his games for reception perception. 35.6% of his charted routes in the games that I sampled were a 9 route. I mean,
wow.
Which is just absurd. Okay.
That's
and so
wild.
The fact that he has that route tree and still posts good success rate versus man, zone, and especially press numbers. And I get it. Big 12, stripped down route tree, mostly lining up on one side of the field in the game in the season that I charted, which is that final season. I had a few people reach out and say like that wasn't always the case with his role, but at least in that final season, those can't be typical red flags of at least like a developmental player. I don't want to say red flags, but just like, hey, this guy might take a little bit to heat up, especially if they're coming from that Big 12 offense. But again, still super impressive that with that vertical roll, he showed an ability to get open underneath as well on like real traditional base NFL routes. So I really liked him a lot. I'm with you. I had him ranked much higher than where he went in the draft. And it's the ambiguous situation as you're talking about. I mean, I was on the Athletic Football Show with Robert Mays, and we were talking about this receiver core specifically, and I was kind of saying that, yeah, and I didn't even think about it this way until now we're having this conversation. They should do exactly what the Rams did last year, like throw the kids out there and figure it out. Like if I'm the Patriots, if I'm, Gerard Mayo and Alex Van Pelt and everybody there, I don't, like, no disrespect, but I don't really care what Juju Smith-Schuster has to offer at this point, or like Jalen Reagor, KJ Osborne. Like maybe KJ Osborne's like a depth special teamer guy, Kendrick Bourne, we'll see. But like, yeah, I want to throw these young guys out there and like see who can sink or swim, much like the Rams did last year. And what makes Baker so interesting, and you did kind of hint to this, that I think of all the other players on this roster, it's a lot of like slot or flanker guys. It's one of these things doesn't look like the other here with Javon Baker, which is that he is a traditional X receiver.
Yeah, I adamantly agree. And I think going back to the film for Baker, the other things that popped both in the conversation for Puka that translates into Baker is that the ability to not only win as far as route nuance, but the body control. Like Baker's highlight stuff is just insane. The body control where he's catching stuff either over corners, near the sideline, like all of that plays up. And again, like there is a lot of green. I just pulled up his RP profile. Like you're telling me this guy like has like everything. You talked about the big boy route tree. Like he crushed it on curls and slants. And yet we're talking about this player who in his collegiate role was shoved into the box of being a field stretcher only. And I think this goes back to the testing. Like Baker was able to win in that vertical role, not because of straight line speed. He wins downfield, and you see he has to have the body control at the catch point to make up for the fact that he's not a burner. But if a team asks him to not do that, I think we see another level to his game. Like go out there, beat man, beat press, be a good route runner, which he already is, and he's going to turn into a high volume guy. Like my comp, and this might sound like I'm over my skis, but looking at his type of talent profile, and again, this is the high range of what I could see for him, but when I turned on the film, I looked at a player that could play outside and inside. The closest guy that I saw off of film that I compared Javon Baker to was Chris Godwin.
Ooh, that's interesting. I had him as more of like a Michael Gallup type of comparison. That's what I wrote in his reception perception profile. Producer Colin actually in the chat said that as well. He's a Cowboys fan, so he would know about that. But yeah, no, I think my comp is more like if he does just get stuck in this X receiver role, and because that was who all Gallup was. You know, Amari Cooper got to do all the like fun move around, like I'm a flanker slot type of stuff, whereas Gallup like, hey, go out there on the boundary and just like try to get open, which he did. And I thought Gallup was a good player before that ACL injury. So, but if he does grow, you know, beyond that, I think that's where your comp can come in as well. Cause listen, this has always been a pro Chris Godwin podcast. So I like that one a lot. And yeah, no, I again, I think we're kind of on the same page here with Baker, but I'm going to throw out another player here for you, D-Bro. And ironically, it's the other rookie drafted on this team.
I was wondering if you were going to go there. I was wondering.
So here's the thing. Like I mentioned that I had Javon Baker graded much higher than where he went in the draft. I actually had him graded in the same tier as Ja'Lynn Polk, Polk went where I think, you know, he's pretty high in the second round, but I kind of had him as a priority second round pick. And that's where I thought Baker could have gone. So like in the end, if Baker ends up better than Polk by my like tiering and sorting, that would not be that big of a surprise. But when I watched rookie receivers this year, prospects coming in, the one guy I thought was the most similar to like, or at least I would say could be deployed in a similar way to Puka Nacua was Ja'Lynn Polk. Because like when you look at the way that the Rams lined up Puka Nacua, he was only in the slot on 24.1% of his sample snaps in RP. He was an outside receiver on 64.5%. He was in the backfield as a pre-snap motion guy, 11.5%. He was pretty much, he was a little bit split between off the line and on the line. So what that means is that he basically played all three receiver positions. I think Polk is a bit of that as well. 60.6% of his sample snaps outside. He traveled in the slot 35.8%. They didn't do as much pre-snap motion there as obviously they did in LA, of course. And he was on the line for 52.9%, off the line for 47.1%. I think his primary position is flanker slot. But if we want Baker moving into the slot sometimes, I think Polk can handle himself as an outside X receiver, especially in condensed formations. And the thing that really stood out to me with him as a player that's similar to the Puka type vibe is the success rate on like big crossing routes and ability to I don't think he's the fastest player. I don't think he's the quickest twitch player. I don't think Puka is either. I think he's got more build up speed, which is what Polk and Puka share. I think as players, they're both like, and this is where the comp like, and again, not historic rookie season comp, but like just some of the stylistic similarities. Polk will get down and dirty in like the blocking game. Like he's got that really rugged approach to him. And that's one thing that like one of the craziest stuff that you saw with Puka as a rookie was like, they're using him as a fullback in some standpoints. He's like setting the edge on run plays. And I think Polk brings that same mentality too. So again, the situation we just talked about it. It's an ambiguous depth chart. He is a high pedigree player. I don't know that he has a super high long-term ceiling, but I did think he was a good zone beater, second best success rate versus zone coverage score among the players I charted. And like you mentioned, Debro, most of the league is zone coverage at this point. So I think a smart passer like Jacoby Brissett would really like working with a player like Ja'Lynn Polk.
Yeah, and I was a little bit lower, just being transparent. I was lower on Polk, and some things you highlighted in his prospect profile. They did use a lot of bunch formations in Washington, got him off the line. As far as whether it was condensed formations, rub routes, things like that, I'm not going to say it was a very Tennessee type of offense because but there were smatterings of when I went back and I got a lot of similar vibes, like when I watched Jalin Hyatt's film when he was coming out as a prospect, as far as how they schemed guys open in that offense. It wasn't exactly a one-to-one comparison, but with Polk, I adamantly agree that I see more slot flanker in him and how you project him to the NFL as far as can he win off the line versus man versus press. I question that a little bit more because they made some of those, they pressed the easy button for him in Washington, but I think he needs to grow in that. But the ability to beat zone coverage and his ability as far as body control and really, really strong hands. That's one of the things that jumped out to me when I watched Polk is you throw in his vicinity, he's got a massive catch radius and really strong hands.
Yeah, I think he's got, like I said, some Puka similarities, but also maybe a more Robert Woods-ish. And I think originally it looked like Puka was going to be a Robert Woods type of player, but he grew and developed way, I'm not going to say like just way beyond that, but just in a different type of approach for the way they deployed him. You know, Jacoby Myers, I think, is a little bit more of a conservative comparison for Ja'Lynn Polk, but I just think the physicality with which he plays reminds me a lot of Puka. And I think we don't know what Alex Van Pelt is going to be as an offensive coordinator, but if they take anything from that Cleveland offense last year, it's a lot of like big over routes on play action with, especially when Flacco's in there, just kind of like a big goofball rocketing the ball, deep down the middle of the field, which I think Drake May, kind of a big goofball who can rocket the ball down the middle of the field. I think there could be some overlap there. So I think those are two good candidates that we've thrown out again on the same team. So it can't be, honestly, it can't be both. That's the thing. But I do like both of those players, and it sounds like we agree primarily on Baker's evaluation. So I'll throw it back to you. Let's get another candidate in here.
The next guy, and I hated that he fell that far down the NFL draft boards, but I understand it. But I think the talent is still real, and now he enters a depth chart that I think is not difficult for him to climb, and that's Troy Franklin. I loved him pre-draft. Okay. He was a top 3 wide receiver for me pre-draft. Now, of course, post-draft, we have to adjust rankings.
You say top 3?
Yes, top 3. I had him top. Excuse me. I'm lying about that. He wasn't top 3. I'm misquoting even myself. He was top 5. I had him at wide receiver 4, right behind the big 3. He was the first guy right behind them over Xavier Worthy. He was my wide receiver 4 pre-draft. But yeah, he was wide receiver 4 heading into the draft for me. But what I saw out of film, like, I don't care about the testing metrics for Troy Franklin. He checked, again, we go back to check the boxes. He is fast. Now we can quibble about how fast he is, or did he reach people's expectation about how fast he is? Fine. People can be disappointed about that all they want to, but he's still fast any way you slice it. And we look at the depth chart, you have Courtland Sutton, who I think we can kind of say is, I'm not going to tell him that he's specifically on the back 9 of his career, but maybe not firmly in his prime. Not a wide receiver at this juncture of his career that's going to be a guy that commands a 25, 27% target share. And after him, what is it? It's Josh Reynolds, it's Marvin Mims, who didn't fully pop last year. We have a depth chart, and I'm sorry, like, Tim Patrick stands. Look, Tim Patrick is a good veteran. He's never been the wide receiver anybody wants to hype him up as. So I like the player, like the fact that he's back with Denver. Going to root for him. Do I think that he's going to be in their starting lineup? No. So really, we talk about ambiguity of the wide receiver room. This could be a situation where he's fighting Courtland Sutton eventually for the lead in targets. He's starting in 3 wide sets in short order. Going to his analytical profile, I mean, He crushed it last year, Harmon. Like 6 in yards per route run overall. As far as versus man and zone, he was top 16 in yards per route run, both versus both coverage types. I think his route running specifically gets really slept on. Like everybody looks at him, and I'm not telling you that some of the size concerns don't show up in his film. Like, can he get pushed off of routes and stuff like versus physical corners that can run with him? Sure, that can happen from time to time. But is he also willing to steal a cornerback's soul on a freaking double move? And is he just absolutely silky smooth on post routes and really just the nuance you want to see out of the route running that can give him that high end type of target share earning ability? Troy Franklin's a guy that, look, even though the NFL said very loudly, we're not as high as any of the, spreadsheet nerds out there post draft, I'm still high on the guy, and I think that we're talking about ambiguous wide receiver rooms. Troy Franklin can climb this wide receiver room in short order.
Yeah, I didn't have him on my list, but this is a really good call out by you. I think that Troy Franklin, like, I was definitely not as high as you were pre-draft, but I wasn't as low as where the NFL had him go. I thought he was somewhere in the middle there. Now, I had heard there were some personality concerns, some character concerns, stuff like that may have pushed him down to that 4th round. So it might not even be that the NFL necessarily disagrees with certainly mine, maybe not even your evaluation of the player. It's just that there were some, things that we don't know in terms of why he fell to the 4th round. But I mean, he was a better prospect than Marvin Mims, and I liked Marvin Mims a little bit as a prospect, but even still, he was a higher graded guy to me, was Troy Franklin. And like, let's just be real about Marvin Mims, man. He was like non-functional as an NFL receiver. Like, you said he didn't stand out as a rookie. I'll go a little farther and say there were a lot more just like rough moments. I mean, not great there. Courtland Sutton's a good player, but I don't even think he's necessarily a true number 1 receiver. He's just the one guy that can play the position on the depth chart right now that we know for sure. Reynolds is like just a solid veteran. So this is the type of ambiguous situation that we want to look for here. Of course, he's playing with his college quarterback, so that's nice as well. Historically, that's been a good thing to bet on the last few years. In terms of like the evaluation on Troy Franklin, again, I'm somewhere in the middle here where you're right. The route running shows up when like he gets some off-man coverage. In zone coverage, 82.4% success rate versus zone. That's a 72nd percentile in reception perception for me. I don't think he's an X, but as long as Sutton's there, and I think Sutton's going to be on the roster, we're not having him play X receiver. Sutton's going to take almost all of his snaps there. So if he can win that flanker role in 2 receiver sets, he could end up playing a lot more than people think. It's just the size really shows up for me when he's working over the middle, press coverage, and in contested situations. So that might limit his ceiling as a player, but in terms of getting on the field early as a rookie, he is definitely a good candidate.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of what you put out there too, man. Like I think that, we're hoping that he plays the Z, and again, we're drawing the parallels here. We want to talk about sharp, smart play callers, and people can hate Sean Payton or say that he's an overrated head coach. Fine, that you cannot dispute that he is one of the best offensive minds still in the NFL and still a really good play caller. So again, we want to garner guys or look at guys that are going to be teamed with who we consider to be top shelf type of NFL play callers.
All right, I like the Troy Franklin one. I think that's a good recommendation. I mean, man, the Broncos offense, though, my God, like
I know it's Bo Nix.
What did you think? What did you think of Bo Nix as a prospect when you're watching your boy Troy Franklin?
Oh, geez, I was like, Bo Nix needs to send a fruit basket to Troy Franklin and say thank you for all the times you made me look really, really good, where I kind of like short arm deep balls to you when you were, instead of taking one to the house for 80 yards, you got tackled for a 60-yard or a 40-yard gain because I didn't throw it far enough to lead you into it. So I'm definitely not a huge Bo Nix supporter. I was lower on him than draft community. I think I had a late 2nd, early 3rd grade on him. So definitely not a first-round quarterback.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the consensus among smart people who were watching quarterbacks. But Sean Payton definitely disagrees with us, man. He really loves Bo Nix, and we'll see how it goes. So I think Troy Franklin's a good one to bring up. I will go another player on day 3 here. And look, this guy, like, talk about ambiguous depth chart. This depth chart is not ambiguous because there are two of the best receivers in the league.
Oh, you're going to take my guy. You're going to take one of my guys. I knew it. I knew we were going to agree on this guy. Go ahead, Harmon.
Maybe we'll see. We'll see though, because there's another player where this sort of fits that I like this guy too. But a player that I thought went way too late in the draft, UVA's Malik Washington. Man, again, he's just not a player he's just not a guy that is going to come in there and have a Puka Nacua type of season because he's playing with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. However, God, this is a perfect system fit for him. Like, that's the part of this that checks the Puka Nacua box. Like, a coach who's going to know what to do with Malik Washington. And hopefully people have seen the video of Mike McDaniel like saying, I was, literally like bothering Chris Greer like crazy to draft Malik Washington for like a long time. And I can you see that in your mind's eye, even if you didn't get a camera view on this thing. Malik Washington, again, just perfect system fit. 85.7% success rate on dig routes, 80% success rate on slant routes. That is the type of stuff we're going to be doing in the Miami Dolphins offense. Over the middle routes, the full speed motion at the snap, Malik Washington is a perfect fit for that. This team destroys zone coverage over the middle. Malik Washington was such an underrated zone beater. He's great after the catch. He's great with the ball in his hands. I thought he had clean hands overall. I had him, Malik Washington, ranked, I think, right behind Troy Franklin in this draft class. That's how high I was on Malik Washington. I thought he was a day 2 guy, pretty close in the range of like Xavier Legette, who went in round 1. I was really, really excited about Malik Washington. So obviously bummer for where he fell in the draft. And again, don't come out here and say like he's going to have some insane fantasy season unless there are injuries. And of course, unfortunately, injuries are just the reality of the NFL. This is a depth chart that I think is climbable though beyond those top 2 players, because I think Odell Beckham, very different role. If he's even like a big contributor, he's going to be a pure outside receiver. There's an opening for kind of a traditional slot receiver on this offense, Debro, and I do think that is where Malik Washington profiles.
So you didn't take my guy, but the setup there kind of gave me some pause. But I still like, I agree with everything you said about Malik. I was so surprised how far he fell in the NFL draft. And I heard certain rumblings, maybe it was medical concerns, which none of that was put out to the masses and stuff like that. And, we don't know. We're just kind of talking about things we've heard. So again, I'm not reporting source stuff or anything, but like,
it was like a hip or a neck or something like that I can't remember now off the top of my head. But that was sort of the rumbling of it.
But a player that, again, I agree with you. He popped. I had him ranked so much higher pre-draft than what happened with his draft capital and post-draft. I had to move him down. But again, I think I had him at wide receiver 10 or 11-ish, somewhere in that range. Like, he was top 12 for me in the prospect list. Like, that's how much I agree with you. That's how much I love Malik Washington and just his skill set.
Yeah, such a big fan of his game, man. Again, there's a lot to like in how he fits in this offense. So, like I said, I think there's another player that you could do that exact same setup that I just had for. So I'm curious, who is that guy to you?
It's Jermaine Burton. That's the guy.
I had a feeling you were going to bring him. So yeah, he's on my list. So I'm going to let you have this one.
I knew we were going to agree on Jermaine Burton. I knew that walking into this because again, we talk about what the NFL draft, like how that played out as far as the off the field stuff and him falling. And I would not have been surprised just based off of the talent of Jermaine Burton if you were to tell me all the off-field stuff wasn't a thing and he went in the first round as opposed to the third round of the NFL draft. Wouldn't have shocked me at all. I loved him. And I didn't get to his film until later in the pre-draft process. And he was one of those guys, like, once I got to the film, I was like, oh my Lord, why are people not talking about this guy as much as they should? And I think one of the big things, and again, the same bucket, I think there were 2 players in this last draft class that were mischaracterized as far as the role they played in for their collegiate offenses and the role they will play in the NFL. And I already discussed it with Javon Baker, but the same sentiments about Jermaine Burton. I think he could run the entire route tree. I think he's a player that can separate at all 3 levels of a defense. He could beat man, he could beat zone. I think a lot of things, and I don't want to bury Milroe in the quarterback play at Alabama, but it was a big factor because when you turn on the film, he won consistently, just burning guys, whether it was route nuance, whether it was speed, whether it was a combination of the two, whether it was physicality. I mean, you look at his per route metrics last year, top 30 in receiving grade and yards per route run. He was in a 82nd percentile or higher in separation versus single coverage and yards per route run. You marry all of that with the film and talk about look, I understand he's going to fight for targets on a weekly basis with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and one of those players has to get dinged up for this type of thing to come to fruition. But Jermaine Burton is a guy that I've remained, even if he doesn't turn out to be this year's Puka Nacua, I still think he's going to be a massive value in drafts where people are talking about, okay, well, could Charlie Jones, could any of these other guys, Andre Yosevas, which I was high on him in last year's draft class. But again, you don't go out and you draft a player like Jermaine Burton in the 3rd round, and everybody's seen the clips. Zach Taylor was over the moon, pounding the table, just ecstatic that he drafted him and got him in the room. I think Jermaine Burton is a guy that we're not fully baking in what his upside for targets can be and his upside just for this season, even if Chase and T stay healthy.
Again, it's similar to what I said with the Dolphins duo, where the top 2 is not ambiguous, but I think everything beyond that, now that Tyler Boyd's gone, is ambiguous. And you said this so perfectly about Jermaine Burton. You look at the routes that he ran above the prospect average in RP, it's all the vertical and downfield routes, and they had a quarterback who's just I'm not going to bury the guy either, but it's just not there. And especially from it was kind of just a chuck it deep offense. It wasn't like Bryce Young, let's work over the middle and matriculate the ball with accuracy like the year before. So I mean, yeah, I'm with you too. I had the exact same sort of process with Burton where he was one of the final players I think I profiled for the site. And after, charting a few games, I'm like, what am I missing here? What am I missing here?
Yep.
And then I start texting a few people I trust. I'm like, oh, okay, got it. That's what I'm missing here. And there's a lot of stuff with Burton. But this quote from Nick Saban on draft night, the producer Colin hit us with, I think is a good one. Mm-hmm. He said, quote, emotional maturity is the best way to say it. Do the right things all the time. There's a difference between playing with emotion and being emotional. When you get emotional, you make bad decisions and you lose your brain. So again, I think we're just looking for this player to be more mature. And I do, Debra, we're out of our skis and we're talking about this stuff, but I think if you're projecting, a young dude with this type of sort of mindset, you get into a building like Cincinnati where you have a central guiding figure there in Joe Burrow. That's Damian Harris said this really well on our draft show. We were talking about this. They have that type of quarterback that can grab a receiver like this and be like, yo, dude, I need you. I need, look, Tyler Boyd's out the door. There's opportunity here. You want to come be great? Be great here. And if Burton wants to be great, this is the type of depth chart and ecosystem to do it.
And Burrow was already doing that. If we want to just go to the social medias, he was already doing that in OTAs, pulling Jermaine Burton aside. And you could see them going through whether it was routes, play designs, things like that. So I think we're already seeing some of those things where Burrow is taking him aside. And you want to talk about pros, you put him in a locker room with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Joe Burrow, and I mean, come on, he falls in line. The talent is there, man. I just think the Bengals got a steal on a player that, again, I had a round 1/round 2 grade on him from the talent profile, and they got him in the 3rd round. If he would have gotten the draft capital, again, Harmon, we'd be talking about him in a different light. People would be discussing the parallels of him versus Rome Odunze. If he'd have gotten that type of draft capital and been selected in the back half of the 1st round by Cincinnati, and he enters the depth chart with Chase and T. Higgins, people would be discussing him in that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 bucket, which I think he already should be discussed in as well. But that conversation would be commonplace and not so just off the beaten path.
Yeah, and look, this is not a perfect way to do this, but the last 3 years, Tyler Boyd, 94, 82, 98 targets. There is opportunity available in this offense, even if the top 2 guys stay healthy. And man, he brings a totally different skill set than Tyler Boyd, because I agree with you. He's a full field separator, but he's more of a pure outside receiver. I think Chase is going to play inside more this year than he ever has, which is going to be big for him. Been talking about that a lot ever since Jamar Chase was actually the one who said to me at the Super Bowl, I am trying to gain the coaching staff's trust to play more in the slot. That was an interesting kind of thing he threw out there. Chase is an interesting guy. Jamar's an interesting dude, having talked to him a couple times, but he is he's a grinder and like has that type of work ethic here that I think can bring these young dudes like a Jermaine Burton along. Just real quick, because I'll say this. I'm going to make an executive decision, and I'm going to wave Jermaine Burton into our 3 finalists here. Like, he's definitely got to be a part of it, for sure.
We're hand-holding too much for him not to make the finalists. Like, he has to.
We'll figure out the other 2 guys, but he's definitely one of the finalists. But just because you threw out Andre Yoshivas, I have not worked on him at all. I did a little bit on Charlie Jones, and I kind of thought Charlie Jones might be an interesting sleeper slot prospect. So if it doesn't work out with old Burton here, he's someone to know too. But Yoshivas, like, what's the deal with this guy? Because I've had a lot of people ask me like what my thoughts. I've not worked on him at all. So what do you think about him? Because you mentioned you were kind of high on him as a prospect.
I liked him as a prospect, and when I was watching him, I think it was pre-Senior Bowl and stuff, he has all the raw talent in the world as far as just physical ability, but you saw some of as far as him entering the NFL, he needed to clean up a lot of different things as far as route running. And we're talking about a guy that played a lot of different sports, so wasn't fully focused on football for the entirety of like high school, college, things like that. But now we're seeing the growth and maturity in his game. I think playing through contact, especially at the catch point, was something that kind of plagued him. The route running needed to get better entering the NFL. We saw some of those things get a little bit better last season when he was thrust into the starting lineup. Like, had some pretty good fantasy weeks for us, but I think he still needs to continue to build on those areas of his game, because some of these guys, they haven't had the same amount of reps or honing all the small little nuances of playing the wide receiver position, because either they haven't played it a ton, or maybe they just got to football later in their lives than other people who've been running routes since they were like 12 and 15 years old.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's kind of my general thoughts about him, but I was curious your opinion just because, again, you sounded like you were kind of higher on him there coming in here. So you got any others you want to throw out here, buddy? Because Burton was my last one. I have a couple like kind of throwaway names, but give me your next one here.
So I'm going to go way down the list for a guy, and I understand people are going to kind of push back against this one, and I'm not telling you it's the highest likely of outcomes, but... And I know you're higher than I am on one of the other guys on this depth chart, so I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. But the last name that I want to bring up here is Luke McCaffrey. Okay. And we talk about players, again, evolving as they get more time, either playing football or specifically wide receiver. The evolution of Luke McCaffrey's game, I think, is still ongoing. And the jump that I think we saw from his first year playing wide receiver after playing college to begin his collegiate career to last year at Rice, in terms of a player that tested way better than I think anybody gave him credit for, including myself. I didn't see him coming out and being that type of athlete. But going back to this, testing only carries you so far. Looking at his film and his ability, I think already he can separate versus zone coverage. I think he's already going to be a very good underneath wide receiver, where I think the next step of his game, and looking at where this projection can kind of take flight, is I already think he's good versus zone. His numbers last year in his final year at Rice said that. He was 26th overall in PFF receiving grade amongst all guys with at least 15 zone coverage targets, 11th in PFF receiving grade versus zone coverage. And we talked about this is a league that is predominantly zone coverage. Even the lowest teams in the league run it at a 54% clip. The highest teams are running at 70% and above. So can he separate versus zone automatically entering the NFL? I think he can. Now, the other parts or pieces of his game, playing outside, beating man, beating press, those are the next evolution that he's going to have to take in his career. I think that what we see on film, he's got that ability in his bag, because you see more strength than a lot of people would give him credit for, specifically at the catch point. And when it's muddy and stuff like that, he is very much a my ball mentality, comes down with those contested situation catches and can get deep. And so I think he still has growth in his NFL career. But what are we talking about, though? Going back to the nuts and bolts of this conversation, Harmon, we want a sharp play caller. Okay, we can all make jokes about Cliff Kingsbury as a head coach and what he did or didn't do. And trust me, I've been there, man. Like I've gone and writing up the primer on a weekly basis. I'm like, come on, Cliff, just please move DeAndre around the formation. He's not just playing one side of the field. Like he can just move him around. Just please move him around. But the other parts about like Cliff's offense that I think we can gravitate to here is the high play volume. They are going to run at a breakneck pace. So even if we only get middle of the road passing rates, that play volume is going to play up just based off of their neutral pace and how fast they're getting in and out of the huddle. And then we talk about the ambiguity of this wide receiver room. After Terry McLaurin, I'm not immensely high on Jahan Dotson. And I think some of the quarterback play over the last few years, we can give some of that credit to Jahan Dotson. But the other part about is his target earning ability. Like he's a wide receiver that multiple metrics. He's been outside the top 47 wide receivers in back-to-back seasons in target share, target per route run rate, yards per route run, first downs per route run. So Jahan Dotson, if we want to marry all this, after Terry McLaurin, who's the clear two in this offense? I don't know if that exists right now, but it could be Luke McCaffrey. And if Terry McLaurin were to go down or miss time with injury, who can step up and be the number one in this offense? And I think a lot of people, the easy answer is Jahan Dotson. I think the other answer that people need to give more credit to as well is it could be Luke McCaffrey.
I'm a little mixed on McCaffrey, but one thing I definitely agree with you on is that I liked his my ball mentality and like his ability in tight coverage. I didn't like sample a ton on him, but that was something I liked about him. And then secondly, I liked his ability to beat zone coverage. Man, like I'll tell you what, he ran slant routes well and he ran flat routes well. If Cliff Kingsbury's going to bring that horizontal raid to Washington, which let's hope he doesn't, McCaffrey's actually a really good fit with that. Like I think he was drafted. I don't know where you thought he should go. I thought he was drafted a little higher than where I thought he would. Like I didn't think he's going to be a third round pick, but I get what they're looking for there in just like a layup slot target. He fits in that like that sort of bucket. And I think they needed that guy after losing Curtis Samuel. I will just say from the Jahan Dotson perspective, I know all the facts, about the targets per route run and the yards per, the first downs per route run. I totally get that. His rookie season, got to remember he was coming off an injury, a hamstring injury there where he came back, aggravated it, lost it again. So that was part of it. I thought he finished the season strong there. Had a, I would say good, not great reception perception profile as a rookie. His second season, man, I want to just throw that in the trash for everybody in that offense. I thought Eric Bieniemy designed him and Pete Carmichael. It was bad. One of those two, either of those two guys was the worst designed offense last year. And that's an offense where the Carolina Panthers were playing last year. Like that's the season we're talking about. So I kind of want to give him a pass for last year, although I don't think he has a super high ceiling. I think at best he'd just be a rock solid number two. That's where I'm envisioning him. I never even, like listeners of this podcast know that I even said last year, I like Jahan Dotson, but like let's never put him in the same sentence as Terry McLaurin. Like there's a clear established one on this team. So I'm definitely higher on Dotson than you. I think he is the clear two on this team. But there is, again, opportunity beyond those guys where, although they brought back Jamison Crowder, De'Ami Brown is still kicking around here. It's still like a weirdly deep-ish depth chart, D-bro. But one thing I'll say, like, I think McCaffrey's going to have a better rookie year than like Ben Sinnott. People like the best. I don't know how you feel about Sinnott, but like I know some of the best ball sickos are like all over him this year. I don't know. Sinnott. Maybe you're one of those sickos. Yeah,
I'm one of the sickos. I'm one of the sicko D-gens. I love Sinnott.
Aren't you worried that he's going to be like a fullback for this team?
No, no. I'm not. I'm not worried about the fullback. And I want to put this. Let's pull this back to just reality. Do we think that the Commanders drafted a fullback in the second round of the NFL draft? I just want to throw that out there. Like,
wouldn't be the first time a Washington football franchise did some weird stuff. Okay, but although fair. I do like Adam Peters and the way they're going about things right now. And by the way, like even if they did, I'm just saying like this year, he's going to be. you know what, blocked by Zach Ertz for like at least the first 8 weeks. But I think Sinat's a really good like dynasty bet. But I just think it's funny that. So, I mean, again, this is all OTA stuff. Who knows? But like one of the first things someone said about him was like, "Oh yeah, he could play all over. He could even be the fullback for this team or whatever." So I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, I'm hoping we don't get to see the fullback usage. The one thing that does give me a lot of hope for Senate is when he does get the full-time role for Washington. I think we don't have any questions, or we shouldn't have any questions about his ability to be a full-time, full-snap player because of that blocking ability. Now, I do think that some of parts of Senate's game kind of get slept on as far as his athleticism, his abilities as a receiver and stuff. But going back to, I'm just overall higher on this Commanders offense than I think a lot of other people are. Both by the quarterbacking ability of Jaden Daniels. I think he's going to be really stinking good this year, both in real life and in fantasy, and the play volume of this offense. They're going to run a crap ton of plays, Harmon. And I don't know if like we're fully projecting all of that in how people are viewing and projecting this offense. Like there's a lot of moving parts or pieces, but we want rushing quarterbacks, we want talented quarterbacks, and we want play volume. We're going to get that out of Washington, but a lot of that's not reflected in any of these guys' ADPs.
Now, it's interesting. I'm kind of with you there that I think this offense could be a sneaky spot for fantasy value. It just sounds like we want to attack it in different ways, which, that'll be interesting to see with the Luke McCaffrey thing. So I think we have a good group of guys here, D-Bro. But before we name our finalists and then eventually our winner, although I have a feeling I know who's going to win this award, we didn't mention guys like Keon Coleman, which would have been kind of cheating because he was literally the first pick of the second round. Ladd McConkey, also the second pick of the second round. Malachi Corley went early on day 3. Adonai Mitchell, although again, he's very deep in a receiver room that we don't expect them to lead the league in pass attempts or anything. Roman Wilson, Jalen McMillan. Any reason we didn't come up with kind of those names? Again, I think it would have been a little bit cheating to say Ladd. Keon, I think, would have been cheating as well. Also, I actually think he could end up playing in a rather Puka-ish role, but not sure about his ability to do it as a rookie. So any of those guys like stand out to you as like, why didn't we name those guys?
I think that entire smattering of players were guys that I was either lukewarm or I was lower than consensus. And I think a lot of them, we could easily ixnay them off of the list based off of their draft capital. But even if we would have included them in here, I'm not that high on Jalen McMillan. I think that looking at how his skill set and the merriment to the NFL and how that projects, I'm lower on him. I'm lower on a lot of those other guys like Malachi Corley. People can miss me with. I think he's just the brand new Amari Rodgers, which I just don't see it with him. I think he's a manufactured touch guy. So a lot of it's just skill sets, and as well as projected volume. Like even if we wanted to throw Ladd into this, what's his max for targets this year inside of the context of that offense? Like 100 targets, maybe 110, maybe.
Which could, that would be nice. It would still be a good rookie season, but I don't think he has a chance to even if like this wasn't the Greg Roman offense. And I'm still like, I'm not totally down with the narrative that they're just going to push the ball on the ground and that's it. Like I think this actually could end up being a good offense for Justin Herbert, but still, I don't think he has the upside of like 140 plus targets as a rookie, even in a normal situation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And not to spew another hot take, but if I'm going to Chargers pass catchers, I actually like Josh Palmer more than I like Ladd this year.
I think that's fair. I think Palmer is a guy I've gone kind of back and forth on as a player, but is like a fine NFL number 3 and like a fine NFL number 3 in the context of this situation actually could be a pretty decent fantasy value. So yeah, I just wanted to mention those guys because I do think it would have been cheating if we had either one of us said Coleman or Ladd. And look, I realized that I did say Ja'Lynn Polk, who was the 5th pick in the second round, but like, give me a break. Ladd McConkey is the 83rd player off the board in best ball drafts right now. Ja'Lynn Polk is 164th. So maybe not real NFL draft steal, but like, I mean, going behind like Adam Thielen, bro. So I think I'm within my rights to call that one out.
You are absolutely. And that New England's Patriots, the stink around that offense, and then nobody wants a part of peace outside of the sickos and degens. And we're all out here like, hey, my favorite late stack is Drake May, and these were New England wide receivers. Outside of us, a lot of people don't want to draft him.
So, all right, let's do our three finalists here, D-Bro. I'll say that based on strength of case, I think we definitely greenlight Jermaine Burton into the three finalists. I really liked your case for Troy Franklin. I think he should be one of the three finalists. And then the last one to me would either be Ja'Lynn Polk / Javon Baker. Like, I don't know. What do you think? Three finalists. How does that work for you?
I agree with that. I agree with the two locked in guys. I think that Troy Franklin needs to be on this list. I agree. We're both in lockstep about Jermaine Burton. He was a must have. I think we're going to have to get producer Colin to sit here and kind of, I don't want to say, split the difference here as far as, because I like one Patriot, you like the other, and somebody's got to come in here and talk some sense into both of us, I guess.
I'm going to dictatorship this thing and say that Colin is already allowed to do tiebreakers on the final winner. I am not going to allow him to tiebreak on this. So what we are going to do, this is not a democracy. This is not a constitutional republic. This is a dictatorship here on this podcast. That is not true. I love you, Colin. I appreciate you. You can clip that.
We were talking about the diva mentality before we turned the mics on and the cameras on, and now it comes out. I love to see it, Harmon. I really do.
All right, so our three finalists here, Jermaine Burton, Troy Franklin, Patriots wide receiver. So that's what we're going to do here. So that's how
love it.
We don't split differences here. We just fudge the rules. So D-Bro, I give you those three finalists, put them in order, most to least likely to be this year's sort of kind of Puka Nacua.
I'm going to put Jermaine Burton at the top of this hill, although I know the target competition for Cincinnati, I can't shy away from the talent, because I think if he gets the opportunity, if anything happens to T. Higgins, he's going to the moon. Like, he's going to have 130 targets this year. So Burton's the number one for me. I'm going to put Troy Franklin number 2, and then our flavor of Patriots wide receiver number 3.
All right, so I am going to go Troy Franklin number 3. I'm going to go Patriots rookie number 2, and we are in consensus here. Jermaine Burton is the pick here. So sorry, Colin, I slammed you, and you don't even get to vote here in terms of the final tiebreaker. Again, I appreciate you, Colin. You're a wonderful, wonderful person and an even better podcast producer. Actually, I think I'm supposed to say that the other way around. You're a wonderful podcast producer and an even better person.
Yeah, I think that's how that saying goes.
But maybe I meant the first one. So, again, wonderful podcast producer. D-Bro, this was awesome. Jermaine Burton is our winner of this year's Puka Nacua. Again, go back and listen to the disclaimer at the top. We're not talking about Jermaine Burton's about to break some damn records. We're just talking about a rookie that we're higher on than consensus and somebody that could be an interesting late round pick. And by the way, right now, D-Bro, again, early best ball drafts on Fantasy Pros consensus ADP, 174th overall player. Ironically, right there with Troy Franklin and Ja'Lynn Polk, who we also mentioned. So just some interesting rookie values to talk about here. But yeah, just final thoughts on Jermaine Burton and sort of expectations in the Cincinnati offense this year.
I love that last sentence, Harmon. When you talked about as far as the rookies, I think that one of the edges still that remains, and we're higher on rookies every single year. But you see these guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, their ADPs pushed up. This second and third tier of rookie wide receivers that are all really stinking talented still are languishing in ADP and ECR and ranks. And these are the wide receivers that people need to be garnering. And Burton is just a candidate where I don't understand why consensus doesn't have him as a top 40, 48 wide receiver. He should be, I think, before we get to week 1. And once the training camp buzz, like we get a few clips of Burrow looking deep to Jermaine Burton, or Jermaine Burton getting open in 101s and just dusting somebody, I think his ADP is going to climb. And the path to 100 targets in this offense is just clear. It's clear and easy.
Yeah, preseason especially, I could see him being a big, depending on what the Bengals do preseason wise, but I feel like he's a guy who will play and could potentially make some big plays against like second and third teamers.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, just when I look at these guys that are after 170 in terms of the rookies, like, again, all the appreciation that we gave for Troy Franklin, but like, Troy Franklin, Roman Wilson, Malachi Corley, your boy Luke McCaffrey, Tez Walker, like Jermaine Burton doesn't belong talent-wise in that group. I understand why he's down there. We all understand why he fell, but like talent-wise, again, he is much more up there with some of these guys that went much, much higher in the NFL draft. So that's why we think Jermaine Burton's just a name to pay attention to, somebody to know as sort of kind of this year's Puka Nacua. D-Bro, again, this was awesome. I knew this was going to be an electric episode, and you crushed both parts of it. So tell the people out there what you're working on that they can check out as we head into training camp season right around the corner, buddy.
Oh man. It's all the things and stuff is obviously at Fantasy Pros. I'm in the Discord daily, doing drafts with all of our subs, rocking the draft wizard daily. So fantasypros.com/mock, and tuning up my final few parts and pieces for the Fantasy Pros draft kit, which you can find at fantasypros.com/kit. My big magnum opus there is already live. My perfect draft article, which I have 80 plus players in that, 20 plus late round guys that I wanted to try to throw something out there, Harmon, where people could apply this to redraft. They could use it for best ball. And the final thing that I'm working on right now for when we get to crunch time is I'm putting out a top 150. So my top 150 players that I have ranked, everybody gets a write-up, everybody gets a full blurb. So you can use the ranks and have all the knowledge that you need to crush your drafts.
Boom, man. You've been busy. You're setting the people up for success well ahead of time. So appreciate that. Again, D-Bro's work is fantastic. Few people approach this thing with as much enthusiasm and depth and zeal as he does. So can't recommend his work enough. Meanwhile, that's going to do it for today. For us, we're going to be back. I hope producer Colin is back. If I have a training camp holdout on my hand with producer Colin after the way I slammed him on this show, we're going to be in trouble. Tell people on Twitter, tell producer Colin that you like him, and I'm going to tell him after the show is over. But again, we are going to be back next Tuesday with our final installment of Flip the Script. Dr. Edwin Porras of Fantasy Points is going to join me for that. We're going to try to identify who is this year's Breece Hall, a player coming off an injury that is still worth gambling on. Until then, we're out.